Good morning. I want to welcome you to our meeting here to meet our Associate Pastor candidate, Susan Langner. First off, our Associate Pastor Search Committee wants to express our gratitude for the trust that you placed in us and your patience and your voice in this process as we've been working to locate our candidate to call. Hopefully, you've all had a chance to take a look at the materials that were sent out about Susan. And I think maybe all of you in this room either know her, and hopefully you've become reacquainted with her. And for those of you who have not met her yet, that you will meet her this weekend. When we announced that Pastor Susan was our candidate, I explained the process of our meetings, evaluations, and interviews, and I'll go over that a little bit more at tomorrow's meeting. If anyone has any questions about that, I will be around and am more than willing to answer anything that I can. We still have a good degree of confidentiality that we are bound to, but I'll answer anything that I can. And so today, when we met before, I received several questions that I told you would be best answered by Susan herself, and I'm really excited to have her here today so that we can have that opportunity for you to have a conversation with her and explore our future ministry together, and so that you can see what we saw as a committee and why she was our clear choice. So that's all I will have, and here's Susan.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a privilege to be here this morning, and thank you for coming out on a Saturday morning. And I'm just here to answer your questions. I think I know all of you in this room, but just to give you a little bit of background, hopefully you watched the little video clip that we sent out about me. So I'm originally from the Chicago suburbs and came to Ohio in college. I went to Denison University, which is where I met Jeff, my husband. And after college, we ended up in Chicago and then back here. I found my way to Westerville Community United Church of Christ in, what year was that? 2011, when I was ready to leave the world of higher education. I had worked in higher education in college admissions for about 8 years, and I loved so much of it. One of the things that happened during that time is in each role I was in, we would have interns work in our office. And these students would confide in you. And I found myself wanting to have conversations with them that went deeper than just the everyday kind of conversations, and realized, gosh, all of those years I spent volunteering in youth ministry when Jeff and I were living in Chicago and we attended a small Disciples of Christ church. Suddenly I felt like I love working with this age group, high school, college-age kids. I loved going into high schools and talking to students about their future, but I was yearning to coach them through something beyond just their college choice. And then I had this little inkling that maybe I was supposed to be working with youth in a church setting beyond a volunteer role. I did something really risky one day. I quit my job without another job. Fortunately, I had a very supportive spouse. We were in a position where we could do that for a finite period of time. I also think that he and I together just felt like it was right, and somehow God was going to bring me to the right place. And a couple of days later, I sat in this sanctuary, and at the end of the service, I looked at my mother-in-law, Bev Langner, and I said, this is a hard thing to say to your in-laws when you are raising their grandson. So I'm quitting my job this week, and I don't have another job. You're going to think I'm nuts. I think I'm looking for something in youth ministry. And Bev's eyes got about this big. And she said, did you read the back of the bulletin? And I said, I haven't gotten there yet. And she said, we're hiring a director of youth ministry. I know because I typed that article. And so I applied, and after a very long process with that search committee at the time, I was hired as your part-time director of youth ministry. And I don't know if anything in my life had ever felt so right up until that moment. You all welcomed me very graciously, and the youth of this church just had me wrapped around their little finger in about a minute and a half. So I ended up serving here for almost 8 full years. The first couple of years were part-time, and then it grew into a full-time position. And during that time, my whole call story is a long story, as they always are, but I started to feel, I think I knew in my heart that youth deserved someone who had more training than I did. Because the kids in this church were asking some really tough questions. And I was happy to sit and wonder with them, and I still am. And I still don't have the answers to those questions, but I felt inadequate in providing them with a path to help them come to those answers for themselves. So that's when I entered Methodist Theological School in Ohio and ultimately completed my MDiv. As you know, at the end of that MDiv process, when I graduated, I was offered a call and accepted at First Community Church, where I have served as minister to youth for almost 2 years, and I have had a lot of different hats in that role as well. Truthfully, I did not think about coming back to this church in my mind and in my heart. I didn't see it as a possibility for a number of years, but my heart has been here. And so when I learned that this search committee had decided, and the profile committee, after talking to members of this congregation, had decided to hire an associate pastor, I thought, wow, that will be so lovely for that church. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. Maybe I'm equipped for that. And after the experiences I've had at First Community, and given really the education you all helped provide for me here, you are really the church that raised me, I decided that I would just embark on that process. And someone said to me that you don't know if it's where you're called if you don't give the Spirit the chance to help you discern that for yourself. So I am grateful beyond words to be here right now, and I'm very thankful to the search committee for the months and months of really hard work, and I'm really grateful for that time. I'm actually, I think it's a good thing that it's a long process, because it gives candidates in the process adequate time to do their own discernment. So with that, I know that there was one question that was submitted ahead of time, because part of my training leading up to ordination was called clinical pastoral education. And I know that there was a question submitted about that. What is clinical pastoral education? Tell us about your training in pastoral counseling. I'm happy to answer that, and I think I'll start there, and then I'll answer other questions as you have them. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. So in the Heartland Conference of the United Church of Christ, and many other conferences, but not necessarily across all UCC conferences, clinical pastoral education, also known as CPE, is a requirement for ordination. And it is typically something that you do in either your final year of seminary or shortly thereafter. And given my there are some seminary students who don't have a family, and so they have more flexibility. Maybe they have a part-time job, they have more flexibility, and they might be able to complete that CPE unit while they're still in school. And I waited until I graduated for all of those reasons. The CPE program is nationally overseen by an organization called the ACPE. Trying to remember if that stands for accredited or authorized or association. So it's a little bit like colleges and universities or other schools that have to be accredited. So someone can't just say, I'm going to offer a CPE program and train people in pastoral care. They have to be accredited through this pretty robust organization. There is a full application process to enter any of the CPE programs, and they're pretty intense. It includes the application itself, and interviews, and essays, and transcripts, and all the things. In this area, someone might complete CPE at Nationwide Children's Hospital, through Ohio Health, and there's a United Church of Christ homes, I think it's in like Beaver Creek, so it's a little bit of a distance from here. And all of those are really exemplary programs. I did a lot of research and decided the Ohio Health program was the best fit for my particular circumstances. And I also knew people who had been through it really recently and found it to be incredibly helpful. So I applied and was accepted to the Ohio Health program. You go through CPE as a cohort, and in my case, our little group, our cohort, was I think 7, maybe 8 students, and with a supervisor or a facilitator, and we met once a week, and each of us had a different ministry context in which we were serving. Now, the most traditional route for CPE, because it's called clinical pastoral education, is to do it in a hospital system. So through Ohio Health, a student might be assigned to work as a chaplain, a student chaplain at Riverside. We had a couple of folks in our group from Riverside. We had someone who was doing his CPE. What's the hospital down by OU? Oblenz, thank you. We had another person who was working in a much smaller rural hospital that's part of the Ohio Health system, and a couple of folks at the Dublin Methodist, and one person who was working in hospice chaplaincy. This is what I found incredibly interesting about our cohort. All of us were in different stages. We were in the same level 1 class, but some of my classmates had no interest in seeking ordination. One in particular was looking to go into a clinical counseling program. Another person, 2 people in the group were en route to become a board-certified chaplain. And that's a whole other, when you meet a chaplain in a hospital, let me just tell you, they have been through a lot of coursework and many, many years. You don't just get to move from one level to the next, like completing a course. You have to really master each level before you can move on. So some students in my cohort had been doing this for years, and some, like me, were doing it for the very first time. My ministry context was slightly unique. I was the only person in my group that was doing a congregational context. Ohio Health, to my knowledge, is the only one of the CPE programs in the central Ohio area that allows someone to do a community-based CPE. I know other folks who have been through it before where their community-based context was working in like a resale shop and a food pantry that was run by a church. And so their experience was interacting with their customers every day, most of whom were lower income, but not all of them. My context, I was approved to do mine at First Community Church, which meant that every interaction I had with members of the congregation and members of my staff became a really valuable opportunity for me to think about how is this a pastoral care moment. I decided to do a ministry context in a congregation because I knew that my call from God is to serve in a congregation. And it was important to me to know, as I'm building relationships with people in a congregation, how then can I best meet their needs when something happens in their life? So this is a little bit how a day works in a CPE class. You come together as a class, and you've probably done some reading. You're going to do a lot of discussion about, have any of you ever done an Enneagram test before? So you know a little bit, it's like a personality test, and there are 9 numbers on the Enneagram. All of that is to help us understand, as pastors or chaplains, how am I showing up in a space? So I'm an Enneagram number 9, for example. What does that mean for me? I know that thanks to CPE, I understand, I know that means I'm showing up in a space as a natural peacemaker on my best day. When I feel really challenged, I might be conflict avoidant. So then, as part of my CPE training, I did a lot of work around conflict. How can I recognize that as an opportunity to grow instead of just walking away from a tough situation, okay? So we did a lot of work around who we are as caregivers. And then each of us, we would take turns, I think 2 or 3 of us were assigned each week to provide a verbatim. Verbatims are really interesting. I see some people nodding their heads who've done verbatims. It means after an interaction with a congregation member or a staff member, I write down literally the entire conversation as I remember it, verbatim, word for word. I talk about what the room felt like. I talk about how I felt. I talk about the cues that the other person was giving to me. And I provide that to my classmates, changing all the names, of course. So together we walk through it and we ask ourselves, what went really well here? What could I have done better? It was really helpful hearing how other people entered a hospital room for the first time when it was a patient they had never met before. They were really interested in how I managed conflict among people I supervised at First Community Church. So some of those became pastoral care situations that I might talk about in that class. I know that CPE was required for ordination. I am so glad I did it. It was probably one of the most valuable and very practical experiences I had in preparation for becoming an ordained pastor. I just gave you a lot of information. What questions do you have about that before we move on? Yeah, Dave. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. We have a microphone up here. Thanks for reminding me. So folks at home can hear us. Do you want to come up to the microphone at the podium? I think it's already turned on. This one right here, it's on.
I'm curious. You had an opportunity to be in Chicago in a pastoral role, then with our church, and then First Community, and there's difference of size, huge difference in sizes. From a pastoral perspective, can you kind of contrast what the difference is being part of a very large church and a church this size, and what are the pros and the cons of each of those two sizes?
Sure, that's a great question. So thinking about churches I've been a part of in the Chicago area, and then First Community, which is a large church. I think there are just over 3,000 members at First Community, and then Westerville Community, UCC. There are some differences, but I'll tell you this, people are people, and pain is pain, and joy is joy. And so that is the same across the board, and the same God that is at work in the church. The small little church that Jeff and I were members of and served as volunteers in Illinois, that same spirit is at work in the larger church known as First Community and here at Westerville. I don't know if there are necessarily pros and cons that I can generalize, because I think it really depends on the people and what it is they're looking for and where it is they feel called to either serve as a member of the congregation and participate in the life of the church that way, or to serve in professional ministry or on a worship team. I think for me, I feel most comfortable when my ministry can be rooted in relationship with people. And that's a little bit harder for me personally in a larger church. But even in a larger church, I came to know a smaller group of people really well. And it is a little bittersweet moving on from any ministry setting, because I love those people. I love the members at First Community, and they've been gracious and welcoming and have invited me into their lives in some really spectacular ways. And I think God calls us to places for a certain season of life and a season in ministry. And I wasn't expecting that season to be as short as it was, but I accept that God is calling me to something new now. It is harder for me, again, personally, to connect to a congregation that's quite that large. And honestly, that was part of my discernment in this process. I've thought back to all of the moments in life when I've had an opportunity to choose my community. I chose a school like Denison because it was small. I toured much larger schools, and something about it felt a little disconnected to me. I knew I wanted a small college campus. And now that I have served a large church and a medium-sized church and a small church, I think I feel really comfortable in a church that's what we call programming size, like this, where we know each other. And we also have some resources to really make a difference in the world. It's hard to name the pros and the cons. You know, when you think about a really large churches, that also comes with different kinds of resources. So during a pandemic, being able to offer multiple online programs from a clergy team of 6 people and a full-time staff of, 30 plus, that was lovely to be able to do that and provide that kind of outreach to people all across the country. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's where I'm called to be forever. Janet, you had a question.
Understanding that pastoral care, at least from what I'm hearing in the hospital situation, is mainly people who are sick or maybe who have lost a loved one or going through some kind of health crisis. Does pastoral care also include maybe those in the congregation who feel disenfranchised or forgotten or not reached out to? How can we, or you as a pastoral caregiver, does that extend to those people?
Absolutely. That's a beautiful question. So how can we in pastoral care reach out to folks who aren't necessarily in a moment of crisis or critical need? I think there are lots of ways to do that, and it's not necessarily something that happens one time. I go back to that idea of building relationship. My boldest prayer is to build a sense of, and relationship grows from trust, right? So my biggest prayer is to build trust with individuals within this community so that folks might feel comfortable coming to me and certainly coming to Zigrid to say, I just feel disconnected. But also being able to recognize, and this is easier to do in a church this size for me, boy, I haven't seen Janet in a while. I haven't heard from her. She used to comment on things, on our social media things, and she hasn't done that. I'm going to send a note, a personal note. I'm going to make a phone call. I might stop at her house. One of the things I did early in the pandemic was write personal notes to all of the kids who are registered as part of the youth program, middle and high school at First Community, and it was like 89 families. That was my hand was very tired at the end of that. And then I also sent, or maybe I did those. I sent emails, individual emails to every family. And then the kids who I knew I had been really connected with and hadn't been super connected with, those were the folks I sent personal emails or personal handwritten notes. And in every communication, I included this invitation to the parents and to the kids. I know that right now it's really hard because we can't come together physically as a congregation. We're not getting together for youth group. But what I can do is I can come and I can sit in your front yard 6 feet apart from you with a mask on. Do you or does your child need that? And it might just be a check-in. I had a few parents respond and say, they seem to be okay. This online school thing is really hard, but maybe just feeling a point of connection to someone who's outside of our family unit, who they trust, would be really good. So I started doing what I affectionately call garage ministry, where I would go, and I still do this. There are a few kids I'm working with, and I go to their homes once a week or once every couple of weeks, and we sit in their garage together. One parent is very gracious, and she set up a little heater in their garage, and we made us hot chocolate. And it was because she had been a regular, and then when we started doing things online, she wasn't coming. And that was the case for a lot of people. They were Zoomed out, particularly our students who were on Zoom all day for school. But I knew this because we had built some trust. I knew her well enough. Something inside of me thought, something's going on. And so we continue to meet pretty regularly. I only knew that, though, because I spent a lot of time, as did this student, this was two-way, cultivating that relationship. So when I could sit down and look at the list of kids' names who, boy, they're not popping up on our Zoom calls, and they're not responding to our emails, and I used to see them every week at Crossroads, which is the name of the youth program. I'm just going to send a little check-in. So for me, that's been the easiest or the most fruitful way of doing it, and it feels the most natural to me. It's not intrusive, and sometimes we just sit and talk about whatever. There's a book series that she loves to read, so we've been talking about that book series. And sometimes it's heavier than that. I think that goes for adults too, though. It's not just, adults and kids aren't as different as we might think. Kids might be more honest sometimes than adults, but the outreach, I think, is the same. Recognizing patterns of behavior, recognizing it's easier in person because body language is a real thing. The other thing I want to point out, my clinical pastoral education started in October, just before the pandemic. So we were able to do things in person as a class unit. Our congregation was meeting in person, and the folks who were working as student chaplains were going into hospital rooms. And then the pandemic hit, and all of us had to learn how to do that differently. So my friends in our program who were chaplains were figuring out how to do phone pastoral care with someone in a hospital. And then also with their families who were impacted by whatever this situation was. I was learning how to do that through garage ministry or phone calls or Zoom calls. I think a lot about folks right now who are learning how to be teachers, people who are in education programs, and the pandemic hit. They're going to be like cutting edge when they get out of school because they will know how to teach in a way that people who have been trained teachers for years and years, didn't have to adopt these tools until it was necessary. I don't know anything else other than I've never been an ordained clergy person in a time other than a pandemic. So I only know how to think about people who are missing from that puzzle piece, right? By thinking about it through really complex terms. Engagement looks different than just showing up on Sunday mornings. How else are people engaged in church during a pandemic or not? And how do we seek out that puzzle piece and try to get them re-engaged? Bruce Langner.
This is kind of a follow-up to that, and it's maybe more of a comment than a question, but I'd be interested in your thoughts. Because engagement is in the job description, we've obviously had a number of ministerial changes over the last 10 years, but we had a group of pretty active young people in the church, not my age group, but 10 to 15 years younger. And once their kids went through confirmation and maybe got out of high school, we lost those people. And it's a group that, being the chair of outreach, somehow we need to focus on those people, either during confirmation or even while their kids are in high school, to make sure we don't go through that again, because that took some of our membership down quite a bit. And I don't know if that's maybe in seminary you learned this. Maybe that's typical of all churches. I don't know. But I didn't notice it so much with our age group, Janet and myself and Mark, some of those people that have been here a long time, and we stayed very involved in the church. But when those people just really started disappearing, it was very disheartening.
Yeah.
And just wondered what your thoughts might be on that, how we can keep them engaged.
Right. A couple of things. So the question was for, if I'm not sure how much that microphone picks up. So Bruce, who looks incredibly young, is telling us that there is a generation maybe 10 or 15 years younger than his generation. And the trend that this church saw for a while was that that particular group of folks, after their kids would go through the confirmation program, their family unit, right, their whole family unit just stopped being as engaged. And they had been pretty active prior to that. Let me first just name, that's painful as a church, right? Those are your family members. And I'm sorry. That's hard to lose members of your family and to not know why. In a more traditional family, sometimes you might know there might be a particular falling out, but for people to walk away from a faith community and you not know why is really hard. And there's grief that comes with that. So I'm sorry for that grief that you've been walking through. And I was here, I think, for some of that too. And it is hard. I knew some of those youth. Some of them were a part of the youth program when I was here, and some came to be a part of the confirmation program and had not been particularly involved other than that. And it's hard not to take that personally because I loved them too. So losing those folks is painful. That comes with some hurt. I don't have, I'm trying to remember if in all the articles I've read about church trends, what it says about folks who are leaving after that particular time in their family's life. And I don't know if I can think of anything that noted that specifically. Anecdotally, I can tell you, most of my friends in ministry with whom I've had this conversation are experiencing something similar. I don't know if it's always, proportionately the same as what Westerville has experienced. I would be curious to talk to those folks and to do some outreach and to say, and maybe folks here already have done that, but to ask, well, what is it? And was there an event that happened? Was it a change in leadership? Was it other changes that you saw in the church? Or was it your own family things, schedule, whatnot? When I've had conversations with people who leave a church, whether it was something they were really angry about or something that was less of a big deal, ultimately it always comes down to, I wasn't being fed there anymore. And sometimes it's because I was so angry about XYZ that I couldn't get past that to receive the nourishment I needed in that space, okay? And sometimes it's spiritually, I'm just on a different place on my faith journey right now. So I don't think that there's a magic answer for that. If there was, I'd write a book and, I'd fund all kinds of things for the church with the profits. I keep coming back to this notion that church is family and that family goes through changes too. And sometimes it's forever, and sometimes they come back just for Thanksgiving dinner, or in this case, Christmas and Easter. And sometimes they come back when a season of their life calls for it. One of the things I find really important in ministry is to help every member of a faith family understand not just what it is we're hoping that they receive from this community, but remind them what it is they bring. So we understand when we walk away, I was an important part, and that church is going to miss the gifts and skills that I brought. That's not meant to be a guilt trip. That's not meant to place shame on anyone. But recognize that you all bring beautiful value. People here rely on you because you might be the person who offers a hug on Sunday mornings when hugs are acceptable again, to someone whose week was just terrible, and you changed it for them. I was on the phone very recently with a dear friend of mine who was having a really tough day in the medical field. And she said, she was just sharing with me her frustrations about losing a patient and decisions that families were having to make. And she wasn't sure if she had done the right thing. And then she told me another story about a woman she helped that day. And she said, well, this felt good. And I said, remember, you might not be able to change the world, but today you changed the world for one person. And I know all of you well enough to know you've done that. And you've done that for people here in this particular congregation. Many of you have done that for me and for my family. So when you walk away, that impacts other people. So when we are in relationship with each other in a faith family, that comes with a sense of covenant. It's also okay, as hard as it is, when someone says, for whatever reason, this is not my home anymore. And we have to honor that and respect that and continue to love that person and tell them if you choose to come back, the door is open and you're welcome here. And go through our own grief process then and care for our own souls in that grief. Are we almost out of time? Are we doing okay? Oh, okay. Debbie has some questions to read. Oh, and Mark has a question too.
These are ones that were submitted online.
Okay.
The first one is a multi-part question.
Love these.
Events over the last few years have caused dissension in our church family. COVID-19, the O&A process, and the welcome statement process. One of the reasons we attend church is to escape the turmoil and conflict of the world. We are looking for positive, uplifting messages of hope and comfort, particularly during the past year of isolation, and in many cases, personal loss.
Yeah.
How might you begin to bridge the divide? What will you bring to our church that we don't already have? It is commonly accepted in the business world that if two partners always agree, then one is probably not needed. How do you and Zigrid agree and differ in pastoral and church leadership philosophies? The social aspect of our church is important and greatly appreciated, but sometimes it does go a bit over the line. How will Susan, the associate, I think we should focus on being a church. How will Susan, the associate pastor, differ from Susan, the youth pastor?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot to unwrap there. I'm hoping that microphone picked everything up because I won't be able to repeat that all. Okay, so where should I almost want to read it again. I don't want to miss something. I think I can answer some of these questions all at the same time, is my hope. Thank you. Okay, so dissension in the church family. So I say this with all the love in my heart for you all. That's not unique to, you're not that special. That's not unique to this church. I don't know a church that's not experiencing the same thing. Because truthfully, I understand this desire, this yearning to come to church on Sunday mornings and escape what's happening in the rest of the world. I also know that what's happening in the world impacts the individuals who are in this congregation and in every congregation. So I think ministers have a responsibility to name it and to partner with the congregation to discern how can we encounter and engage with these problems in the world outside of this space faithfully, through the lens of our faith. We might have different ideas about how to do that, but I am certain that everyone in this congregation has the best interest of this church at heart So if we can start there and grow from there, say, okay, we love this church and we want what's best for it. We love Westerville and we want what's best for this broader community. We love our country and we want what's best for this country. We love the world and God's creation in all the earth and we want what's best for it. Now, we might not agree on the steps to take to get there. But if we can start with that level of respect and love for one another and assume the other person in dialogue with me has the best intentions in their heart too, that's a really good place to grow from. I think the pandemic, because we haven't been able to dialogue with each other in the way that is healthy and in person, has just compounded all of these challenges. So I think that will be a process. And, if I'm blessed to be called to serve as your associate pastor and to work with Sigrid, I cannot stand here and tell you Sigrid and I will know exactly how to do that. We will have to do it together because we are 2 minds, and this congregation is 600 plus minds. So let's put those together and say, where do we go from here? Assuming everyone wants what's best for this faith family. The O&A process and the process of creating your new welcoming statement, that had to be hard. There are churches out there that refuse to engage in that work. So I really honor you all and your willingness to embark on that journey because just the process itself is important. The end result is also important, but I think the steps that you take to get there, the workshop, I was here for the first part of that. The panel discussions, the questions, the open and honest dialogue, that's incredibly important, and that speaks to you who you are as a congregation. It says we're willing to do the hard work together. We're willing to do the hard work together. And we might disagree about some things, and also I still love you. I come from a family divided. My own household family, Jeff and I are of pretty like mind on a lot of things, but my extended family, Thanksgivings are really interesting. I love them. I will never stop loving them. But when I am up here preaching a message, my job is to be a pastor to everyone in this congregation and to recognize that the scriptures teach us a lot, and they were written by people in a day and age when the Spirit was speaking to them about their particular circumstances. So I wonder, how do we see ourselves in those same sacred texts? And what is the Spirit saying to us now about how we move forward? The Bible has a lot of dissension in it too. So fortunately, we have a few examples we can look toward. I wouldn't necessarily model all of our reconciliation processes after how people did them in our sacred texts. Let me see what else. How might you begin to bridge the divide? So I mentioned this, I think, to the search committee in one of the interviews. I don't think the pastor should have the last word. At the end of the sermon, we might say amen, but that was my prayer. That sermon was my prayer. And you might not be ready to say amen about whatever it is I just said. So I will promise you this. If I preach a message that feels really uncomfortable for some reason, or it's contentious, that's not my hope, by the way, but it happens. That's not the end of the conversation. I would love to establish an opportunity for us to gather, whether it's that same day, right after the service, to dialogue, and someone can say, you know what? What you said really irked me, and this is why. I see it totally differently. Or maybe it's later in the week, and we have that conversation after we've all had a chance to kind of think it over and bring our best selves to the conversation where we're ready to be compassionate with one another and loving and open to what the other person has to say. The pastor shouldn't get the last word. I am called to preach the gospel. I am called to bring the good news. So I work really hard to offer a piece of hope and goodness and good news and new life in every sermon that I deliver. Because because that's what the Bible is all about to me. That's the arc of the Bible, is that through all of this tumult, there is good news. So for those who are looking to come to be challenged, I think I will challenge you. I am challenged by the scripture. There's a lot in there I don't like. That doesn't mean I don't get to preach it. I am comfortable challenging other people because I am comfortable being challenged. So know that. If I say something from the pulpit that feels wrong to you, talk to me about that. We don't have to be combative, but I have done a lot of work around conflict. I'm very open to that conversation because some of you have heard me say this time and again. All of us get to where we are theologically, socially, politically, based on our lived experiences. So the more I get to know you, this is how I build that bridge. Again, it comes back to building a relationship. The more I get to know you, the better I understand your lived experiences and how they have shaped your views and why they're different from my views. And your views are valuable, even if they are extraordinarily different from mine. I draw a line in the sand and I would not expect this from anyone here. I will not accept hate speech, right? I'm not so moderate that it's like, well, I can't. I will not accept hate speech, and I will always stand on the side of people who have experienced deep marginalization, because it's not that Jesus stood with them, it's that Jesus was one of them. I am called to follow Jesus, and I will do that. And I invite you to follow along with me. But truthfully, I think if we build a relationship that's built on trust and love, we can have a healthy argument. Wouldn't it be lovely for Westerville Community UCC to be the model of disagreement, of holy disagreement, the kind of place where we say, you know, we can flourish here. We can welcome diverse theology, and I know you do, and disagree with each other and still love each other. And I am not above having my mind changed. People have taught me things, and I think, oh, wow, I've never thought of it that way. Okay, maybe I see where you're coming from. Maybe I'll meet you there. I'm not sure. I'm hoping. Oh, and how will I be different as an associate pastor than I was as the director of youth ministry? I think a lot of that comes in the training that I've done. I think my seminary education was extraordinarily powerful. The CPE program, as I've already mentioned, was huge in shaping that. And quite honestly, 2 years serving a church in the capacity I've been serving there, supervising people. So my job here will be much more ministerial than it was as director of youth ministry. And I'm excited about that. I'm also really excited to partner with Michael and support him in whatever way he needs to be supported and to support the youth as well. But broadening my ministry experience to kind of, embrace the whole of the congregation in a more official role feels very good to me. There are more questions on here. Yes, come on, squeeze yours in. Okay. Come on up, Mark. Thank you.
So Bruce's comments and some of those questions kind of really tally with where I wanted to go. I don't think that it laid out the seismic changes that have happened in the world and in our church in the last 2+ years. I mean, we've undergone a major ministerial change. We've an interim pastor, and now you're a change too. So you might be a change agent, but you're also part of the change.
Absolutely.
And that represents, I think, a broader challenge. And I really value a lot of your comments. I think that one thing I would say, the question is, what's your priorities for the first 90 days? But I think that from my standpoint, and I think I represent a population, we're not looking for activism, we're looking for integration. of viewpoints, because we've had plenty of activism. What we need is a way forward to find that common ground. And the comments around this being a place to get away from those things, that doesn't mean they don't go away
Right,
when we're in this building.
right.
But it does mean that we can make this a focal point to find that common ground. So in that first 90 days or so, how do you read the room? How do you, don't come in and say, here's where we need to go,
Right.
but help yourself discover where we've been
Sure.
in the time you've been away? What's your plan to do that 90-day
Sure.
plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to be frank with you, I don't know what you need right now for all the reasons you just explained. I've been gone. There are some things that I'm hearing from you all and that I heard a little bit from the search committee that sound familiar to me because I know other churches are going through similar things. But there are challenges that you all have walked through that are unique to this congregation. So I think the first 90 days, it feels a little bit like when there's a new president in office. Like, what do you, first 100 days, I get 10 fewer than the president. So that's good to know what the expectation is. We're in a hurry. Well, I just really have to talk to a lot of you. I suspect if I talk to 100 different people, I'll get 100 different answers. Or maybe 90 different answers. And I think that's beautiful. So some of that then comes down to, so that's step one, is talking to you all, reconnecting, building those relationships. And for some people, it might be, I want to tell you what's happening in my personal life. And for other people, it will be, I want to tell you how I feel about how things are going on at church. So I'll have some pretty decisive questions to help guide that conversation, which will help give me some good information. And then a lot of it comes back to, what is the capacity of the staff, and what is the capacity of the congregation, and what are the gifts that we have here that we can draw from to help us meet some of those challenges. So the staff, the ministry team here is amazing, even without me as a part of it, and they've done a lot of really good work, and they've worked really hard to, keep going through this hard time. At some point, we have to understand every staff has a max capacity. What else can we take on? So is it a matter of taking on new ways of doing things or shifting how we're doing things to meet a broad congregation and a diverse congregation? So I would just like to spend time with you all to get started. And then in partnership with Zigrid, bring together some of you who are like-minded and some of you who see things differently with some ground rules for a conversation that goes like this. Here are my challenges, and this is what I need from this faith community right now. Here are my challenges, and this is what I need from this faith community right now. I suspect even among differing viewpoints, there will be common threads that come out of that we can build upon. For me personally, one of the most difficult things about this pandemic and church is that all of the things that make a church, like our ritual of coming to this table, right? We haven't been able to do that in normal ways. So how can we root ourselves in those rituals and traditions again? Because I think that is what brings us together as a community of Christians, is how do we go back to the basics? There's a lot happening in that world. There's always been a lot happening in that world. And we continue to baptize babies. And when we baptize children, we make vows as a congregation, right? That's a ritual that grounds us, that unites us, that brings us together. There's a lot going on in that world, and there's always been a lot going on in that world, and we can still come to this table and look at the person across in the eye and say, God loves you as much as God loves me, and God is here to nourish all of us. God forgives you and me. Let's start from there and move forward. So I think for me, this comes back to going back to the basics, getting to know you all again. and quite honestly, giving you a chance to get to know me again and how I've changed and how this pandemic has shaped me and my ministry. There will be people who say, to your point, Mark, exactly what you said. I don't want my church to be an activist church. And then what do we do with people in that same conversation who say, I want my church to be more active in issues of social justice? How do we reconcile that? I think it's a lot of really hard conversation, and I think it's a lot of Jesus. And truly, I would encourage everyone to enter that dialogue with the most open mind and heart, and to recognize there's a chance I will be changed by this conversation. You asked something else that I wanted to address, and I'm not sure if I did. The first 90 days. So the other thing I wanted to mention about that is a big part of an associate pastor role is to support the pastor and the director of youth ministry and the whole of the congregation. So a lot of that 90 days will be finding out in what ways do they need support right now, and how can I offer that? Some of it might be, very practical. I know we've had conversations around social media. I know Dan's been really involved in the social media. That's something I feel really comfortable with. These little ear things are, I think I don't have the right shape ear for these. This happened with my ordination too, I remember that. A little PTSD here. Okay. Learning in those 90 days what I can do to just support people. So it's just a lot of information gathering, finding out what the capacity of the staff is, what new gifts are emerging from this congregation. We've all had to do things in new and different ways. We've learned new skills in a pandemic. So what skills have you learned that you can bring to this community to help us work through some of these challenges? Are we almost out of time? Is that what you're here to tell me? You have a question? I also have other questions here, so go ahead.
So I have a related question to that one. In your first 90 days, as it were, there is a relatively small but very vocal and very powerful minority that stands against things like change and activism. And there is a relatively large majority that does not feel heard or that they have the power to push those things. Beyond reconciliation, how will you not push your agenda, but make the agenda of most of the church heard?
Yeah, I don't have an agenda. So I am not a politician. I don't have an agenda. All the members of this community will be members for whom I'm a pastor if you call me to serve here. So I am one person, and I really like listening. So I can sit and listen for a very long time to all of you collectively or to you individually. I'm wondering if as a congregation we're listening to each other also. So that's not just the job of the two pastors, but Zigrid and I both have training. She has many more degrees than I do. And so maybe some of this becomes an opportunity for us to coach each other on how to listen. Not just listen. Are you hearing me? One of the beautiful and frustrating things about Westerville Community UCC is this is a microcosm of so much of our country right now. Maybe proportionally it's not the same, right? So if people think, well, there's this number of people who are very progressive and this number of people who are less progressive, it represents a broad spectrum of theology and politics and social issues. But I'm not coming to this with any agenda, and my prayer truly is that none of you are either, because church should not be about an agenda. We come to worship God. and to grow in community out of our shared Christian faith. That's what we come here to do. This church does social fellowship beautifully. And I will admit something to you, that when I first started working here, I was, I don't want to say bothered, but for lack of a better word, a little bothered, because I was like, oh my gosh, all these potlucks, all this softball, like, where's the churchy stuff, right? And this is what I've come to learn over time, is that you can worship really well together because you know each other so well. You can trust each other with your most difficult life moments, and you've done it, right? Through diagnoses and deaths and joyous celebrations like weddings and baptisms and births and everything in between because of that fellowship that you built. So sometimes, praising Jesus is just about having fun together and dancing. Do we need more of that? Do we need more dancing? I can bring the dancing. I think, I'm really understanding, I'm hearing from all of you that there's just this chasm. So I name that. I lift it up. If you were coming today hoping I would have the solution for that, I don't. But I can promise that I will walk with you through that journey to build the bridge across the chasm. Someone asked, our profile listed a number of challenges and opportunities. What do you think is the number one challenge we face? I think it's that chasm. I think it's whatever, and I think that's, this might be controversial. I don't know if that's a terrible thing, because I think it says, what is our greatest opportunity? Our greatest opportunity is to build the bridge, like I said, and to model for other churches and for other communities in this world how we do that, how we can sit in rows together on Sunday morning safely 6 feet apart, knowing people to our right and to our left view the world differently than we do, and we can worship the same God, and we can love each other. Part of it is, what direction do we take this church? And so that will take a lot of bridge building, because the church has to move in one direction or the other. If a church is stagnant, that's a tough place to be, right? So that's where we have to work together to figure out where we move the church. And that process, I'm not going to say it will be difficult. It has been difficult. The O&A vote was difficult. Some people are probably upset about the result of that vote. There is healing that has to happen. That's what I'm hearing. There is healing that has to happen. Someone else asked about the pastoral care, which I mentioned. What's my interpretation of discipleship and engagement? I asked myself the same question when I read the description. I view discipleship a lot through the lens of faith formation, which some people just call Christian education, but I think it's deeper than that. I think it's beyond something that a board of Christian ed provides or a Sunday school class provides. I think discipleship is, how do we follow Jesus together, right? I think we start by building a bridge. And that's not a 90-day process. I want to go on the record as saying building bridges is not a 90-day process. And engagement is how are we showing up and engaging in the life of the church, but also how are we showing up and engaging in lives for each other within this faith community. So whether it's a new member who comes to the church or someone who's thinking about being a member, getting them plugged in to the right activities that suit their gifts and their interests and nourish their own spirituality, that's engagement. For the person who was a charter member and has been here for a really long time and is starting to feel like, boy, there's just nothing here that's feeding me anymore, helping that person get reconnected with the church so that we are feeding that spirit together, co-creating with God in a way to do that, that's engagement. Were there other questions? I thought I saw a hand up. I think I did my best to answer the questions on here. Hopefully I did. And I know that I'm meeting, did you have something to say? Come on up.
Since it doesn't sound like there are.
Do you want to use the microphone?
Doesn't sound like there are any more questions, so I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you, Betsy, and the search committee, profile committee, transition team. I'm sorry?
Talk right into the microphone.
Sorry.
There you go.
Thank you, Betsy, and the search committee, the profile committee, the transition team for bringing us to this point, for bringing Susan to us today. And thank you, Susan, for taking the time to meet with us here at council and for answering some tough questions, for being so open and sharing your story. I so appreciate your candor. And thank you for just sharing your ideas and helping us understand the gifts you may bring to our community here, our church community. So that's all. Just wanted to just had another plug to say thank you and for being so, for just being
Absolutely.
so honest and open and answering
Sure.
so many pointed questions and just sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and for coming out on a Saturday. And Sigrid has something to say also.
Okay.
I am not so sure if this is now the conclusion of this meeting because I know you're meeting the youth at 11:30.
I am.
Would it be okay if we closed with a prayer?
That's okay with me.
Because we didn't open with one, so I just thought it would be nice after we all in the church. And I keep noticing we have the door open on one hand, and on the other hand is the cross. And if you look at this cross, before the cross is the table where we serve communion. The ever-widening circle of fellowship. You mentioned softball, you mentioned potlucks. It starts there on a Sunday morning. It starts here with an open door. Just the symbolism of the open door on one hand and the cross on the other hand, and you're right in the middle in front of this table where we serve the most important meal of all, for me is very symbolic. That we can meet from here and go into the world. And especially now in this Easter season, where we still see the white shroud, and it is unequal. Did you notice that? I'm not so sure which way to interpret this, but there is not equality. There is not all. It has to be worked on in many, many different ways. And I'm not going now into interpreting which way goes longer or shorter, but for me, just the symbolism of we are in this Easter, in this growing season, and having you here, where all what we did in the past, I feel really much like the disciples, all what they knew in the past, Jesus is still going with them into a future which we don't know. So having said that, with the open door, I would really like to offer a word of prayer. Gracious God, thank you. Thank you that you have brought us here from different paths of life, not only today, but some of us have been for many, many years. We have charter members, and we have somebody who was just confirmed with this last year. Thank you for the many, many experiences, and all of us who call this church our home. Westerville Community United Church of Christ, our home, where we meet not only on a Sunday morning, but where we meet in order to go out into the world, having been fed and being nourished. Thank you especially for the search committee under the leadership of Betsy Binning. They did a lot of searching and discerning, a lot of reading, a lot of praying, a lot of listening to each other and to the candidates and to God's Spirit. We are grateful that we are here at this junction right now, and you lead us on this threshold to go forward. We ask your blessings today and tomorrow and hopefully for not only for the 90 days, but for a much, much longer time together, that we can do ministry with the open door, centered here, underneath the cross, just in front of this table, which we call communion table, the table in which you feed us to serve one another and you, and to go into the world. We ask all this in Jesus Christ. Amen.